Okay. Hello. Does it work? No, not working. Okay. All right. No, yes. Back on again. It's already. Okay, we can. You don't want any water? Oh, it's terrible. What's it? What's some water? 95%. Like, no, it's still good. Come on, at least I tried. You know what can you do? You can try it.
It's the good intention.
Exactly, that's what I mean. It's always a good come. Okay, let's see what happens. Okay, working. Okay. So welcome back again, and we're going to continue now with the kind of standard way that dependent origination is presented in the suttas. So we had another detour, but now we're going to look at the remaining links or the remaining factors here of this thing. So we have just looked at feeling and how that conditions craving, and especially through this long detour, how it leads to all kinds of problems and troubles. And now we're going to ask for the condition for feeling. This is what the Buddha has to say. Contact is the condition for feeling. That's what I said. And this is the way to understand how this is so. Suppose there was totally and utterly no contact of anything anywhere. That is contact through the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, and mind. When there's no contact at all, with a cessation of contact, would feeling still be found? No, sir. That's why this is the cause, the source, the origin, the condition of feeling, namely contact. So contact is a kind of strange word. It kind of sounds very technical or whatever. And I think that the one translation for the word passa in certain contexts, it is the right translation, is simply experience. Yeah, when the kind of the I is intact and the I meets the world through some kind of object, then what you do is you experience the world. That's what contact really means. And sometimes contact can mean maybe the initial point of experience, where it starts when you contacted initially, but often it just means experience in general. So you contact the world, you experience the world in this way. And of course, you have to have experience to have feeling. If there's no experience, if there's no contact with that world, then of course, there's no way you can feel anything. You can't say anything about that world, good or bad, or neutral. So this idea of contact, how does it arise? And here in this particular sutta, we will go back to the name and form as the cause of contact. But as was pointed out to one of the people who came to talk to me yesterday, is that sometimes dependent origination is actually expressed in a different way. Yeah? So contact then goes back to, instead of going back to 6 sense spaces or name and form, it goes back to the actual sense impression that happens. And the way that sequence starts, it starts off with, if there is the I, if there's the I, and there is the object, dependent on the I and the object, I consciousness arises. And then when I consciousness arises, the meeting of the three, the sankiti of the three coming together, that is called contact. That is what experience is. So the moment consciousness arises, depending on I and form, that which you see, and that is when you see something. And for that to happen, it's not usually there has to be also an attention involved with that. You cannot actually see anything without attending to what you're seeing. That's actually something you find in one of the suttas, in the longer sutta of the elephant's footprint, Majjhima 28, and middle length saying 28, you find this idea that you also have to attend to the object for anything to happen. It's not enough that there is an object in the eye. Sometimes there's all kind of things happening around, you haven't got a clue what's happening. Yeah, you're focused on something, you don't know that there's noises going on or whatever. Yeah? But you have to actually place your mind on that thing. Yeah? And of course, where we place our mind, that's where it gets quite interesting, because where you place your mind will depend on all kinds of causal conditions. We don't place our mind randomly on things. It depends on what we're interested in, and it depends on the purity of your mind. So it depends on all kinds of background into the world. So we don't experience the world in the same way. Each one of us here, even though we sit in the same hall, we're going to see a slightly different hall, depending on what is of interest to us, what is that catches your attention. Some of us may see the beam, some of them will kind of focus more on the light, some of us will see more the people, depending very much on our background and all these kind of things. So what that means is that it means that we are not the passive recipients of external stimuli or external things. Yeah, it's not like it just passively goes into us and we have to receive it. How we receive it depends on the development of the mind. That's kind of good news, right? If you are a passive recipient, that means that the world always has to be what the world is. But if you are not the passive recipient, it means that if you develop your mind, you make a mind more bright, you make your mind more having all these qualities of being able to have more samadhi, more attention on what you're doing, more mindfulness. It means that the world itself changes as you develop your mind. The world itself becomes more bright. You see more positive aspects in the people around you, the world around you. So this is kind of the idea behind this sort of showing this kind of conditionality, is that there's always an element of subjectivity in all of these things. In fact, a large element of subjectivity. In the end, it might all be subjective. It comes from us in a certain way. So where we attend, how we attend to that world will depend entirely on our conditioning. And as you practice a spiritual path, you purify that attention, and everything becomes brighter. You attend more in the right way. You attend to the things that are important spiritually, not just to the things that kind of want to, kind of powerful impacts from the outside. And so there's two ways that this kind of contact happens usually. Either it can be an external object that's very powerful, like a loud sound. Yeah, it's almost impossible to ignore a loud sound that kind of penetrates into your mind, and you have contact depending on that. Or it can be an internal thing whereby you go seeking for some external stimulus. You're hungry, so you come at around lunch, you look at the things, you're searching for the nice food or something like that. That's what I do anyway. I'm just kind of admitting to my own kind of weaknesses. You look for the nice food, and then you kind of go for that, which I think is okay. Am I allowed to do that? Thank you. So this is two ways, right? And of course, when it comes from the outside, then there is often less you can do. Then you have to kind of re-establish your mind. There's kind of less you can do in terms of controlling it, so to speak. But when you go out into the world seeking for external things, then it will depend enormously on your mental attitude. What is important to you? What your entire mental development lie behind that. And what you go seeking for in the world will then, of course, then have a tremendous impact on everything that comes afterwards in dependent origination. How craving arises, if it arises at all, upadana, attachment, all of these kind of things. You start to look out in the world. You don't look for a partner. You look at people in a compassionate way. These are fellow suffering people, rather than looking at them with a kind of desire or something like that. Yeah, so your entire approach to the world changes, and that changes the whole effect of dependent origination afterwards. So, this is not something you have to remember, because it's kind of obvious. All you have to do is develop your mind, and these things happen automatically. Yeah, it's kind of it's not something you have to really think about, but it's kind of nice how the Buddha creates this framework for you to understand the relationship between how we perceive the world and how we develop the mind. There's a close relationship between the two. So that is that part of it is not really expressed here, but it's expressed other places in dependent origination. I just thought I'd bring it up because it was mentioned to me. But here it just says that contact is the condition for feeling. Yeah. So let's go. Let's move one step further back. Yeah. Next one is name and form, nama, rupa in Pali, are the conditions for contact. That's what I said, and this is a way to understand how this is so. Suppose there were none of the features, attributes, signs, and details by which the category of mental phenomena is found. Would linguistic contact still be found in the category of physical phenomena? No, sir. So that is very impenetrable what that means, and unless you have studied this before, you have no idea what's going on. Like, what or on earth is this all about? So don't feel remotely bad if you haven't got a clue what's going on there. So, so what this is about, basically saying that to be able to contact the world, you need to have a mind. That's really all it is saying. Yeah? Mental phenomena has to be found. We could have said just mental phenomena are found. Yeah? We could have taken out all those attributes and features or whatever. You have to have a mind to contact the world. If you don't have a mind, you don't have these mental phenomena, it says here, there is no way that the world can be experienced. We cannot have experience without the mind. And what the mind does, the mind interprets the world for us. Yeah, so there is the kind of raw sensory input that happens through the senses, and then the mind works on that input to determine what the world means. Yeah, and so everything in our life, all our perceptions, how we divide the world and how we understand everything is a fabrication of the mind, to make sense of this sensory input that we have. And this is called paṭicca-samuppāda in Pali. He called it linguistic contact. I think it's better to call it something like description contact. Yeah? Adivajana literally means something like description or designation. To me, I don't really understand why he uses linguistic contact. I'm sure he has a reason for that, but I don't really get it. I would prefer, for me, it's more comprehensible to say description contact is a description of the world or a designation of the world, putting things into categories so we can make sense of the impressions around us. Yeah, when I speak now, what comes out of me is just kind of vibrations. Yeah, if you are a baby, all you hear is this kind of gobbledygook. You don't understand anything at all, right? You know there's a sound going on, but you have no idea what it is. You don't know if it's the bisons or a monk. And this is how we start out in life, and somehow out of this sound, it's just kind of sound going up and down in different ways, and we're able to make this incredibly complex tapestry called language. We're able to understand what is being said. It's like a miracle, really, when you think about it. How on earth can you kind of make all of these things out of these sounds in the air? It's kind of extraordinary. You make a meaning out of it, of really abstract meanings. Just like we're doing now, it's really kind of abstract. When you think about the amount of mental effort, the amount of mental stuff that goes on from a sound, there's an air vibration hitting the drum of your ear, to gaining this kind of picture in your mind of what's going on, is extraordinary. And that tells you how much work is done by the mind to be able to interpret the world. This paṭicca-samuppāda is enormously important. And it also means that, again, like I was saying before, when you have the I and the form, and then you have the I consciousness, and it depends where you place your attention. Yeah, where you place your attention will depend on the development of your mind. Here is exactly the same thing, because if the mind interprets the world, how we interpret our world will depend entirely on our mental development. How do we see that world? Do you have a sense of self or not? Are you an arahant or not? Do you see people as suffering beings, or do you see them as enemies or out to get you? These kind of things, makes all the difference in how we react to these things. So again, this is another way of saying that contact, we're not passive recipients of external phenomena somehow hitting our senses. We are actively involved in the interpretation of these things. This is the importance of this kind of dual contact that you see in the sutta. You only see it, you don't really see it anywhere else in the sutta, so this is why it is kind of interesting. Yeah. So the world, we interpret the world, we work on the world, yeah, and we make that, create that world in our mind. So if there is no mental phenomena, there's no way you can have that linguistic contact. There's no way you can actually make sense of the world. So for that reason, you can't have any contact. It says here, would linguistic contact still be found in the category of physical phenomena? It's just saying that if there is no mind, then can you think with the body? That's basically what it's saying. Of course not. You can't have any, thing. You can't make the world up with the physical things. It has to happen in the mind. So what about this whole thing about attributes, features, signs, and details? What is that all about? And that seems just to be about the idea that the mental phenomena, how do we know that we have a mind? Well, you know that through the attributes that we kind of designate as mind. If something has certain attributes, we call it mind. What are those attributes? Well, there's mental feelings, there is perception, they're perceiving the world, there is awareness, the consciousness of things, there is volition. In other words, 4 of those 5 khandhas, they are really mental things. And those mental things, they are the signs and the attributes by which we know that there is mind. That's how we define the mind. So why does the Buddha say it in this way? I think the idea, I'm not 100% sure what's going on, but I think the idea is that it's too easy to think of the mind as something kind of always there, some existing thing. It's like the last thing that we take to be the real self is the mind. But actually, it's just a bunch of signs and features. When those features are there, then we call it mind. If they're absent, it's not called mind. There's nothing kind of real beyond those features and signs by which we know, by which we take it to be mind. So there's all these features and signs, and they're always changing, moving around, and there's nothing really behind those things that is kind of an entity in its own right. I think it's something like that is going on there. That's kind of the purpose of these things. Usually, everything in Buddhism is kind of geared towards seeing non-self, because this is the profound teaching of the Buddha. This is the thing that he always ultimately tries to show. So if something is very profound, you can usually reduce it down to some kind of non-self teaching. All right. So then the Buddha says, suppose there were none of the features, attributes, signs, and details by which the category of physical phenomena is found. Would impingement contact still be found in the category of mental phenomena? No, sir. So here we have the other kind of contact. It's called impingement contact, paṭicca-samuppāda in Pali. And what that means is like the senses are being impinged, means like hitting, hitting or affecting the senses. Impinges on the sense. So an object can be said to impinge on the sense. So in other words, there is a meeting of the sense and the object. It hits the sensory, almost like the air hitting the eardrum, the vibrations and bang, and you hear something, almost like that. So you have to have that. That is the first part of sense impact, of kapasa. You have the physical phenomena being kind of stirred up, and then the mind afterwards acts on it. That's why there's 2 aspects to contact. The physical impingement, and then the understanding or the description, the making sense of that impingement, which happens in the mind. So what he's saying here is that, well, if there is no physical body, if there is none of those features that make up the physical phenomena, can you have that impingement happening directly in the mind? Of course not. You have to have the eye. The eye is a physical phenomenon. You can't have an impingement directly in the mind. You need to go via that physical phenomenon. It's not always true. There are exceptions to that, which is kind of interesting, like the immaterial attainments, those kind of things, where the impingement happens is a direct mental contact. But here we are talking about more coarser kind of impingement, I presume. So again, yeah, how do we know that the physical world is there? How do we know that we have a physical world? Well, this is kind of how you know, yeah, that okay, it's there, so it's the sign. Yeah, you feel some kind of resistance when you put your hand there. That's really all you know. There's a resistance, there's a kind of heat there. There is forms and shapes, and these are all kind of the attributes of the physical phenomena. That's how we decide that there is a physical world out there. So just these attributes. Behind the attributes and features, is there anything? Yeah. Probably not. Yeah, probably all there is just attributes and features, and it's experiences we have, and nothing solid behind it. Again, this is kind of the idea, I think, behind this kind of wording. Yeah. And then the Buddha says, suppose there were none of the features, attributes, signs, and details by which the categories of mental or physical phenomena are found, would either linguistic contact or impingement contact still be found? No. So when there's no body, no mind, nothing physical, nothing mental, all contact is defunct. There can be no contact at all. And the categories of mental phenomena and physical phenomena are nama, rupa. This is why we're saying nama, rupa, name and form, is the condition for contact. Yeah, these are the words behind this. I should maybe point out that one of the interesting words here, interesting words here is the idea of category of mental phenomena and category of physical phenomena. The word behind that is namakaya and rupakaya. Yeah, the word kaya is found. The kaya is often translated as body, and he specifically refers to the mental body and the physical body. This word kaya is used in this way. I think I mentioned this the other day, and very often it means almost like personality. Your physical personality and your mental personality. Yeah, the body, the conglomeration, or the group of all phenomena that makes up the mind, and the group of all phenomena that makes up the body. The word kaya means like a heap, yeah, a group of something, a grouping of phenomena coming together. And again, this is very important understanding to get words like this right. It's too often assumed that the word kaya means physical body, but all the evidence in the suttas actually suggests otherwise. That it is in fact another word for physical body, and that's sarira. Sarira is used when the body is dead, for example. That's when it definitely means body, and it's no longer anything to do with personality, right? When the body is dead, it's never called kaya, always called sarira. And there is a reason for that, because then it doesn't have any relationship to your personal existence anymore. And so this may seem really kind of abstruse and you know what's going on here, but actually these little things really matter. If you really get into Buddhism, these little things like that become incredibly important. And if those people you really get into it, they can kind of argue about these things for too much. Because in the end, you just have to come to a conclusion and forget the arguing. Otherwise, you're going to spend the rest of your life arguing, and you're going to die, and you're going to continue arguing in your next life. I think that's why we argue so much, because we've always argued in the past, so we kind of carry that habit with us. That becomes the cause for rebirth. The arguing actually drives the rebirth process because it's a kind of craving, and because it is so much part of your personality, you just get reborn and you carry on. Probably argue about exactly the same words that you argued in the past life. And the reason we keep on arguing about them is because actually there probably is no final solution. There is no final argument that will settle it once and for all. We look for this final argument, but probably they don't even exist, those final arguments. In the end, you have to just see the balance of probabilities and just take your choice and then get out of those discussions. Often it is like that. Life in the world, often there is no absolute certainties in these things. They can't expect that even in the Buddha's teachings, because we're dealing with language. Language is uncertain. Language has blurry boundaries. A single word, a single expression has a variety of meanings or nuances of meanings. There is no absolute boundaries for these meanings. For that reason, because we're dealing with language, not with mathematics, there's always going to be blurry, always going to be uncertain. It takes a sharp mind to be able to kind of really be clear about what is the balance of probabilities of meaning in a certain case. And very often the wise thing to do is actually to go with the commentaries. One of the kind of problems often in the modern world is that people will say, oh, don't forget about the commentaries, because the commentaries are just all errors, yeah. But the reality is that most of us make far more errors than the commentaries. So what they're saying is that I like my own interpretation, so I'm going to check out the commentaries, and then you end up making much more mistakes than you would have if you didn't use the commentaries. The commentaries is the accumulated wisdom of 2,500 years of Buddhist monastics mostly. Some of them would have been greatly attained. Some of them might even have been noble ones, Aryas. If it is the accumulated wisdom of a large body of people with a lot of wisdom, it's worthwhile taking them seriously. It is very likely that if we want to override the commentaries, most likely it's hubris. It's kind of an ego trip. Yeah, I know best. Why? Because I'm me. That's why. That's kind of how we think. It's a kind of sense of self. Yeah, it's a feeling of oneself being so important. And so, for this reason, I have to be careful with this kind of tendency of setting aside the commentaries whenever it is convenient to do so. Should rather be taken seriously. On the other hand, there are times when the commentaries are wrong. So if you have a very good grounds for going against the commentaries, you're allowed to do so, but you need really good grounds. And you need a lot of experience with reading the suttas and the Vinaya to take that stand. But I think there are some obvious cases where the commentaries go wrong. And that's also to be expected, because we don't know who all the people were behind those commentaries. Maybe some of them didn't really know 100% what they were talking about. So, so that's I'm just saying that because sometimes it is can be very difficult to understand what is happening. So, name. So we have this word kaya again. I was just saying the word kaya was that mean something like person. It can mean direct experience. Kayena is like used as an adverb, and etc. etc. So anyway, let's leave that to one side and let's carry on with the last part concerning contact and Namarupa. The Buddha says, suppose there were none of the features, attributes, signs, and details by which name and form are found. Would contact still be found? Would contact be experienced? Would there be experience? And the answer is no. If there's no name and form, there can be no experience. So, name and form is the basis for experience. So once you get reborn, rebirth implies name and form. So once you have been reborn, you will have to have experience for the remainder of that life. And name and form is part of the thing that arises upon rebirth. Okay. So he says, no, sir, that's why this is the cause, the source, the origin, the condition of contact, namely name and form. Anyone want to leave now, or are you sort of hanging in there? Are you all right? You're very welcome to leave at any time if you wish. Because this is only the beginning, now it gets worse. Just warning you. So, okay. Or perhaps not. Let's see. So, then the Buddha goes on. We have looked at how name and form conditions contact, and now we want to look at how consciousness conditions name and form. Yeah. So the Buddha says that consciousness is a condition for name and form. That's what I said, and this is a way to understand how this is so. If consciousness were not conceived in the mother's womb, would name and form coagulate there? No, sir. So, so for there to be an embryo that exists, we have to have consciousness. Now, this is a very hard passage to interpret. What does it actually mean, coagulate? Does it mean that there is conception? Is that what it means? What does it mean, a later state of the embryo that it can develop in a certain way? It really depends on this word, coagulate, which is not exactly it's very hard, Pali word is very hard to really get correct here. Exactly what it means. The Pali word is the famous word samuccissati, and it's a very rare word. I think it only occurs here in all this entire Pali canon. So it's not a word that you would normally hear. So anyway, the point is that at some point during the development of a fetus, consciousness needs to arise. Otherwise, it will stop. It could mean, it's possible that it means at the point of, at the very beginning, but at the point of conception, it's possible it means that, but it's not entirely clear. So I'm not going to stake any bet on that. So consciousness has to arise at a certain point. Otherwise, there is no kind of development of that embryo. And then the next one, if consciousness after being conceived in the mother's womb were to be miscarried, if consciousness were to disappear at a certain point, would name and form be born into this state of existence? No, you have to have consciousness. It has to be there to support the development of name and form. If it doesn't support the development of name and form, that's when you have a miscarriage. That's kind of what that means. There's no consciousness of mind in that embryo anymore, and so you miscarry. That's kind of the meaning from a Buddhist point of view. If the consciousness of a young boy or girl were to be cut off, would name and form achieve growth and increase and maturity? No, sir. Consciousness always has to be there. That's kind of obvious. If consciousness of the mind disappears, then the other aspects of the body or the mind cannot develop. It requires consciousness all the way through that. And so consciousness is like the basic thing that is always required to keep both the physical body and the aspects of mind. These things only develop in the presence of consciousness. They cannot exist without it. And it's, it's sort of obvious, right? But it's, anyway, the Buddha here makes quite a lot out of it to make it very clear what is going on. So that's why this is the cause, this is the source, this is the origin, this is the condition of name and form, namely consciousness. It is the supporting condition that is required. When it says here the development of name and form, what does that mean? Well, it just means that throughout life you change in various ways. You change physically, you start off very small, then you grow larger, then you grow a little bit too large down the track. That's usually what happens. And so that's the kind of physical form. Then you start shrinking after a certain age. And then you have the mental aspects also. They grow and change over lifetime. The way you perceive the world, the way you react to the world, the way you feel about things. All of these things are changing and developing all the time. This is why these things develop with the support of consciousness this way. Again, nothing kind of earth-shattering about that, but that's what he's saying here. And then now comes the really interesting part. Name and form are the conditions for consciousness. That's what I said. And this is a way to understand how this is so. If consciousness were not to become established in name and form, would the coming to be of the origin of suffering, of rebirth, old age, and death in the future be found? No, sir. So here is the idea that if consciousness doesn't actually move towards name and form, if the consciousness doesn't establish itself, it says here, in name and form, then consciousness itself, actually doesn't have anywhere to go. There's no way for consciousness to hang out. And if there's no way for consciousness to hang out, it hangs out in name and form. Consciousness stops. There is no rebirth. There is no future movement of that consciousness. Consciousness needs to be attached to something. It needs to crave for something. It needs to be established in something, to lean towards something, have an interest in something. If the consciousness has no interest in any kind of existence, and that is what it means to be attached to things, to have an interest in existence in some realm. If there's no interest in that existence, no attachment to it, no craving for it, then consciousness isn't leaning towards anything. And in the absence of that leaning, there is no forward movement anymore. There is nothing to drive the consciousness forward. It is not established in name and form. If it isn't established in name and form, consciousness itself cannot exist. And this is the point here. It cannot exist without that support in name and form. So consciousness ceases at that point. And this is really what the discovery of the Buddha is all about. This idea that consciousness cannot exist without support in name and form, one way or another. Without that, consciousness has to come to an end. This is so important and so radical and so interesting because it goes against the whole history of religion in India before the time of the Buddha, where the idea was that the mind or consciousness somehow could stand apart without being dependent on these other things that are always changing or whatever. Somehow it can stand apart, and it can be like the ground of all being, the Mahabrahma, the consciousness of the world, which is always there in the background, which does not depend on anything else for its existence. No, says the Buddha, everything depends on something else. Everything is connected into this causal matrix of phenomena, which makes them stabilize and make them remain. And without those things, actually, they cannot exist on their own. And in reality, consciousness never actually exists apart from all of these things. Consciousness doesn't have an existence apart from these things. In reality, consciousness always, when we are conscious, we also feel things, we also perceive things, we're also aware of things, usually we will things, all of this sort of stuff. So the reason why the Buddha phrased it in this way is not to show that consciousness can be separated out. It is merely to take the most basic aspect of the mind, and to show that it always has a relationship to other aspects of both mind and body. It's more like it's a device or a way of analyzing reality that does not correspond to any reality, simply to kind of show that all of these things are dependent on each other. It doesn't mean that consciousness somehow can exist by itself. In fact, it means exactly not that, because they are mutually dependent on each other. So it's important to kind of, I suppose, the main point here is just that there is this mutual conditionality between these two particular phenomena. So this is also discussed in another sutta, which is a very beautiful sutta called the Kaccana-gotta Sutta. It's found in the Samyutta Nikaya, the connected discourses on dependent origination, and the 15th sutta, Kaccana-gotta Sutta, and this really talks about this kind of conditionality between name and form on the one hand, and consciousness on the other hand. Talks about existence and non-existence, and how the Buddhist way is kind of a middle way between existence and non-existence, and how it kind of is neither one nor the other. It discusses this in quite a bit more detail. I'm not going into that now, because that particular sutta will probably take at least an hour to go through properly. So I'm just going to leave this with that, I think. But let's look at this next paragraph that comes here. That is why this is the cause, the source, the origin and condition of consciousness, namely name and form. This is the extent to which one may be reborn and grow old, die, pass away, and reappear. This is how far the scope of language, terminology, and description extends. How far the sphere of wisdom extends. How far the cycle of rebirth proceeds, so that this state of existence is to be found, namely name and form together with consciousness. So the idea behind all of this is basically just to say that when you have described name and form and consciousness, you have described everything. There is nothing more beyond these two things. The whole of existence, the whole of the world really is described by these phenomena. There's nothing beyond that. So, for example, it says it is to this extent that you are reborn, grow old, die, pass away, or reappear. It means that everything in our life revolves around these things. And if you want to go into a past life, what do you see? Name and form conditioned by consciousness. Go into life before that, what do you see? Name and form conditioned by consciousness. Go into future life, exactly the same thing. All that ever is name and form conditioned by consciousness this way. The two things kind of revolving around each other, dependently supporting each other like two shields of reed. This is one of the similes used in the suttas. Yeah, two shields of reed, consciousness on the one hand, name and form on the other. If you take one away, the other one falls. If you go one way, one falls. Always this dependency. And the ending of rebirth is the only thing that breaks that dependency, because consciousness no longer gets established in name and form, because it no longer has an interest there. So it kind of stops at the point of death, does not move forward into anything at all. So the moment you stop all attachment and all interest in rebirth, consciousness is no longer willing or able to establish itself, to find the footing in worldly phenomena, and therefore it stops. So in one way, when we look at the 12-link dependent origination, prior to consciousness there is sankhara, and sankhara is then said to be the previous life, and then you have ignorance before that, and then ignorance goes back forever without any beginning. And it does not mean that this way of presenting dependent origination we're seeing now does not go back to previous lives, whereas the other one does. It does, because this way basically says, well, and then it kind of carries on forever into the past. More name and form, more vijnana, conditioning each other, going back and back and back. So really, you could argue that dependent origination in this sense is not really about one life or two lives or three lives. It's about an innumerable number of lives. It's just this kind of endless sequence going back forever. That might, in some ways, be a better way of thinking about it. And then you kind of bypass this whole discussion about how many lives actually enter the lives. That's kind of also more realistic about how samsara actually happens and how it exists. And then he says this is how far there is a scope for language, terminology, and description. Language, terminology, and description really comes out of these five khandhas, name and form and consciousness. Everything we talk about, everything we describe, everything that can be somehow use concepts to describe exists as far as those five khandhas exist. When there are no five khandhas, there's no scope for language anymore. There's nothing can be said about things beyond that. Why? Because this is the totality of experience. No experience beyond this. And this is the reason why things like the Buddha says nibbana, the extinguishment, you can't really, is kind of beyond language. The reason it's beyond language is because it is beyond experience, the cessation of things. You cannot say anything about the cessation of things. It just ceases, and then there's nothing. You can't say, nothing doesn't have any qualities. So that's the end of it. So the moment you start defining nibbana, or you say, I experience nibbana, well, that's actually if you experience nibbana, well, then you can say something about it, because experience, by definition, you can say something about it. Although if you can't say anything about it, you can't experience it. These things go together. So that's why nibbana is not an experience. It is precisely the end of experience. How far the sphere of wisdom extends. Wisdom is about these five khandhas, and it is about how to understand them in the right way. This kind of makes it very clear here. So it is about seeing the five khandhas in the right way. So wisdom can be defined in the suttas very simply as understanding the five khandhas in terms of the three characteristics. Five khandhas are the five aspects of personality. The three characteristics are anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanence, suffering, and non-self. So that's really what it is, understanding the five khandhas in terms of the three characteristics. That's kind of what wisdom is about. And so all of this is within the sphere of what we see here. The sphere of wisdom extends so far. This is how far the cycle of rebirth proceeds. So this state of existence is to be found. Yeah, rebirth is all about these things again, namely name and form together with consciousness. So that is where this sutta comes to not an end, but where the Buddha ends is a description of dependent origination in this particular sutta. Comes down to name and form being dependent on consciousness and vice versa. It would have been nice maybe to discuss this in a bit more detail, because it's actually very interesting, this particular conditionality. I'm not sure if this discussion I had now was really quite satisfactory to really make it clear, but anyway, it's probably good enough for now, because we have many more suttas that we have to have a look at as well. But yeah, if you have any questions about this and you want to bring anything up, if you are able to ask questions, even sometimes things are so unclear, you don't even know what to ask. Yeah? It's kind of my feeling sometimes, like, what should I even ask about this? But if you do have something, please, of course, bring it up and we can talk about it later on. Otherwise, please have a look at the Kaccana-gotta Sutta, 12th chapter of the Connected Discourses, Sutta 15. And if you look, you will find lots of good Dhamma talks online that actually talk about that particular sutta quite extensively, so you can get a good foundation understanding what it is about. All right, I'm going to carry on, and what I'm going to look at now is I'm going to look at the two first factors of dependent origination. The two factors that we find when we have 12 factors, and of course now we're looking at these things in a slightly different way, because the next factor before vijnana usually is not namarupa, usually it's sankhara. And then before sankhara means like the will, basically, and before sankhara we have avidya, which means ignorance or delusion, something like that. So we wanted to discuss that a little bit, because simply to make it a complete understanding of this idea of dependent origination, especially since this is the standard way that it is described in the suttas. So this is from the first sutta in the Nidana Samyutta, all the suttas on dependent origination. I'm just going to read it out because it's quite simple. It says the following. What is dependent origination? Ignorance is the condition for choices or for the will. The choices are the conditions for consciousness. Consciousness is the condition for name and form. And then it continues on all the way to the end of dependent origination. Yeah? So the condition of consciousness is here said to be choices. Choices is Bhante Sujato's choice for translating sankhara, right? It means the will, it means making decisions. Choices is perfectly acceptable, I think, as a translation. It is a bit unusual, and for that it's also interesting because it kind of broadens our understanding of these ideas. This word sankhara is very interesting. It's often debated again what exactly it means. And the thing is that it means different things depending on context. But its standard meaning in the suttas, in terms of dependent origination or in terms of the 5 khandhas and how it is usually used, it means the will. And it's specifically defined as the will in many places in the suttas. There's no doubt that that is what it means. And so anything where the mind is kind of moving towards something, making a choice, willing something, creating something, doing something, you're the doer, having the sense of agency inside, and you decide to speak, you decide to whatever it is, all of that comes from sankhara. It's the movement towards something when you are willing something in your life. So why is it that choices are the condition for consciousness? Well, to decide that, let's start with ignorance, right? Let's start with avidya at the very beginning. And avidya, ignorance, can be defined in a large number of ways. But just to make it easy for now, for this particular case, let's just define ignorance precisely as not understanding impermanence, suffering, and non-self. Yeah, I just said before that the idea of insight in Buddhism is to understand the five khandhas in terms of these three things: impermanence, suffering, and non-self. So if that is the purpose, that is what insight is. If we don't see those things, then we are ignorant or we are deluded. So let's say that we don't understand these things, we are ignorant. What does that mean? And what that means is that we tend to see happiness in the world where there is no happiness. We tend to think that the pursuit of the sensory pleasures in the world is all that the world is really about. This is what matters. The pursuit of status is the most important thing in life. Yeah, climbing the social ladder to kind of get to a higher level. Yeah, I'll tell you a secret. The easiest way to climb the social ladder is to become a monk. Go straight to the top. Bang! Yeah. So if you are a social climber, that's the fast way. Yeah. You people who are social climbers, they will never listen to this kind of advice anyway. They're not interested in that one. But there is some truth to that, right? That's what I'm saying. Because if you go to Asia, you can see, especially in Asia, in the West it doesn't work quite like that, but it works a little bit like that here as well. But in Asia, there's a big kind of social hierarchy. Yeah, and the monks are kind of above the king. Yeah, in kind of places like Thailand. So very quick, very fast social climbing. It's not a good reason for becoming a monk, by the way. I wouldn't, or none, I wouldn't recommend that as the reason. It would be considered the wrong reason. But it's nevertheless, there is some truth to it. But if you try to find happiness that way, you are deluded. So that's kind of a bad start to the monastic life. So it is all about searching for happiness in the wrong place. Because we don't understand where happiness is and where suffering is. We look for happiness where there's actually suffering. Yeah? And then we look for happiness where there's suffering, and then we look for suffering, and sometimes when actually there is happiness, we get things completely the wrong way around. So not understanding the world means that we search for things in the wrong way. Yeah? This is part of the problem. And when you then search for things in the wrong place, yeah, you are making sankharas, you're making choices, you're exerting the will, yeah? You're looking for all this happiness in the world then. And because you're looking for happiness in the world in the wrong way, yeah, those actions that you do, this is basically karma. You're making karma through your activity of searching for happiness in the world then. And sometimes your search for happiness in the world, it coincides with being kind, with doing the right thing. When you make good karma. But sometimes because you're searching for happiness in the wrong place anyway, you don't really understand how things work, you end up doing bad things in the pursuit of all of this worldly happiness. And because you make bad choices in the pursuit of worldly happinesses, you make bad karma as you go about these things. So you make a variety of karma, some good, some bad, some neutral, running around in the world trying to kind of get hold of this happiness that is supposed to be out there. And you have misunderstood how the world works. And then whenever you make a good choice, it affects your mind. Yeah, you feel the choices in your mind. You make a good choice, you feel good about yourself. Make a bad choice, you feel bad about yourself. And the accumulation of all of those choices, that's called karma, that kind of decides how bright your mind is. If you have made an enormous amount of good choices in your life, your mind is going to be incredibly bright. That is the feeling of good karma in your mind right now. It feels good in the present moment. And I think this is one of the most best ways to think about karma, because very often karma seems like magic in Buddhism. But the Buddha talks about karma as Dhamma karma, the karma in the present life, samparayika karma, which is a karma in the future lives. Actually makes a distinction between next life and the lives beyond that, but never mind. And we can actually know and experience a karma right here and right now. Right? And this is very useful. If you can see whenever you have a kind of slightly bad intention, your will is coming from the wrong place, coming from some kind of defilement, and you can see the connection between that acting on that intention and how you feel about yourself, it becomes a very powerful motivation not to act in that way. Or sometimes you will notice that you're acting from great purity, and it always comes with joy. Yeah, it comes with this lightness of the mind. You really want to do something really nice. It actually feels good. And the moment you can see that, you can see the connection between intention and feeling. And that's really what karma comes down to, this connection between intention and feeling. Good karma, you feel good about yourself. Bad karma, you feel bad about yourself. And yes, in popular Buddhism, that translates into, in the future life, you have a big house. Yeah, that's kind of popular Buddhism, because good big houses feel better than small houses. That's kind of the idea there. Yeah, so this is how it translates into popular culture. But really, what it means is that you feel better about yourself in a variety of ways, including perhaps materially, if you have good intentions. So your consciousness then becomes bright, yeah, or it becomes dark if you live in a bad way, or it's kind of neutral, it kind of stays on the same level when you die. So because your consciousness then has a certain level when you die, and there's still a craving there to be reborn that drives you onwards, that station of your consciousness when you die, where it is established at that point, when there's interest at that point, that will become the station where you get reborn. So even though you come into human existence at a certain level, you change that existence level of your consciousness as you live and making good and bad karma. The totality of that will decide your level of consciousness, and then you get reborn accordingly. The sum of your karma decides your rebirth in this way. It's kind of very natural. Very often we talk about Buddhism in such silly ways. It sounds like magic. Yeah, if you climb now, you get a Mercedes in the next life. You probably don't want a Mercedes, but whatever it is that you want in the next life, right? But this is so silly, and it is so, it's a very kind of simplification to the point where it becomes hard to really believe at that particular point. We need to bring it down back to natural principles that we actually can understand. Yeah? And when you know that the Buddha talks about Dhamma karma in the present life, you know it must be something else than kind of the rewards you get in the future life for being kind now. It must be something broader than that. And this is a far better way to understand it. It is really the mind that really matters. And that's why the main idea of karma is not whether you get a big house or a nice car in the future life. It is really about where you get reborn, whether it's in the human realm or the deva realm. That is really what karma is about. And that, of course, is largely about what kind of happiness you experience. So forget about all those material things. It's really about where we get reborn that really this is about. So this is how it works, right? There's another factor here that is very important, because another important part of ignorance is the feeling of a self. Because we have a sense of self, it feels like we have agency. It feels like we can do things in the world. It feels like we can pursue the things that we think are going to be happy. It feels like we have the ability to avoid the suffering in the world as long as we kind of use that sense of self in the right way. And that sense of agency combined with the idea that you think you know what happiness is, means that you are almost compelled to try to create that happiness for yourself. You're compelled because you are the agent and you know what happiness is. So why on earth shouldn't you go out into the world and create that happiness for yourself? So that's exactly what people do. They work really hard. They have families. They try to kind of make all of those things, make a good relationship, have a nice place to live, have some nice entertainment. All of these things that build up in their life because they feel they have the agency to do that. And that is often a delusion. It's often a misunderstanding. Because even though you have agency, the things in the world are so uncertain, so unreliable. You just don't know what is going to happen. Sometimes you succeed, but sometimes you fail. And when you fail, it is very heartbreaking for people. Yeah? People who fail in the world, it doesn't go according to their dreams, or things really turn out really sour. And it can be completely so destructive. And, people really kind of end up with incredible sorrow and lamentation because things don't go the way they are supposed to go. This is one of the biggest problems in life. Yeah? And because we put so much effort, so much energy in making the world right in terms of relationship, in terms of everything around us, then when it goes awry and completely fails, then it becomes very, very problematic. People cry, people lament, people sorrow. So there is really only one solution to all that. You have to start to change your attitude to the world, understand that that world actually is out of control. And if you seek refuge in that world, guaranteed that you're going to cry, you're going to suffer, you're going to lament. And with all this pursuit of things that we're putting so much effort into it, Yeah, the more effort you put into it, the more of yourself you put into it, because you think that you are the creator of your life. You have the ability to do this. Because so much of yourself is into these things, the disappointment is so much the greater when it fails. You can see why people get incredibly disappointed, because their whole life's work gets destroyed in one fire, in one war in Ukraine, in one flood in Indonesia, in one whatever it is, one burglary. Everything is gone. There's all of these things that can make things just disappear just overnight. And that is why, when you come to the end of your life, that is all you have done. You come to your deathbed, you feel confused, you don't know what's going on, because everything you have done in your life has been for the purpose of this life, and this life only, without remembering the kind of bigger picture of things. So it's really problematic. Yeah, you put so much effort, this sense of self and all these things really is very destructive. So then you start to understand, as you practice this path, as you take the teaching or the Buddha seriously, you start to understand, well, actually happiness probably is to be found somewhere else. The world is so unreliable, so I better find that happiness on the spiritual path instead. And then, because of that, you start to look for happiness elsewhere. It means that your sankharas, your will, your volition, your choices are going to be different. Yeah, now your choices are the choice to be kind, the choice to be caring, to be generous, the choice to be compassionate towards other people, the choice to practice the spiritual life, to meditate, whatever. Different kind of choices. Choices that are more conducive to actually finding some kind of happiness. There is still some sense of self there, because it takes a long time for that to go away. There's still some degree of agency, some sense that you are creating, you are the agent of your own happiness in this life. And there's still a little bit of that, but now that sense of I is being directed in a more skillful way, so as actually to really do create some kind of happiness for yourself. So your delusion is going down, avijja is going down, and when avijja is going down, sankharas get more aligned with the Dhamma. Your agency is more aligned with how the world is. And then when that happens, you are creating less bad karma, because you are now living a good life. Your consciousness becomes brighter. It lifts up instead of kind of being flat, not going anywhere, because you make a bit of bad karma, a bit of good karma. Now there is a trajectory going upwards. That is kind of what really the spiritual path is about. It's about this trajectory of moving towards something higher, something better. So if people ever ask you how you are, you should always ask, I'm getting better. That is the correct answer. Because that means you're practicing in the right way. Yeah? You should not say, I'm good, that's meaningless. It means anything wrong. I'm getting better, it's actually meaningful. We all start out on a certain point. Yeah? What does good mean? Good means just one thing for one person, something else for someone else. It means nothing. Getting better means something. It means that we are actually moving towards the goal of Buddhism. That's kind of the proper answer. I like or good, bad, or knows, or some other cryptic answer that we can say to people. It's really nice to give cryptic answers that people can look at you and wonder what are you saying. And if the other person is sharp, they will pick up that maybe there's a bit of something interesting in those words. Yeah? So you start living in a better way, and then you start also to understand that actually the sense of self is really overrated. This is one of the things you start to see as you practice meditation. Yeah? The sense of self is a blooming nuisance. Sense of self is always there in the background, making itself felt, doing things, just saying, here I am, don't forget about me, that kind of stuff. Making noise in a meditation, making you think, making you perceive things, and making all these kind of things happen when you're supposed to be peaceful. And you start to understand how overrated it is, this whole idea of a sense of self. And so then that sense of self starts to die down. And then you become more interested in actually not doing anything at all. You start to understand that happiness actually is not in creating the happiness for the future. It is in allowing those sankharas, the will, to die down. That is where you find the real happiness. And this is where the penny really starts to drop. And this is where your outlook of life really changes completely. Because instead of creating your future, by doing things, you create your future by not doing things. It's kind of almost like an oxymoron. You create it by not creating it. The uncreating of the creating of the uncreated, or something like that. I don't know. by not creating, by not doing, that is where you find real happiness. That is where you build up a mind and consciousness that is extremely bright and beautiful and powerful, full of good qualities. So you let go of overdoing. And the more you do that, the more you see that the sense of self is overrated, because the most important part of the sense of self is really doing activity. This is one of the hard things to overcome. And then you enter a state of full samadhi, where doing stops completely. Your consciousness goes to maximum kind of brightness at that particular point. Yeah? So you're starting to really understand the problem of this whole thing of samsaric existence, this whole agency thing. And now you're very close to the truth, right? You have seen, if you see that all the doing is problematic, you're very, very close to seeing reality full. There's only a little bit left over to understand. That is to understand that also the knowing itself is not really worthy of being taken as a sense of self. But if you're able to let go of the doing, if you're able to let go of the five sense world, and only really the knowing is left, and you overcome all the hard parts that have to be overcome in samsara, and all that is left is deep samadhi, the jhana states, that sort of thing. And the final thing you overcome is to understand that even consciousness itself is non-self. Yeah? It's the final remnant of delusion at the very beginning. Yeah? And you already know you're not supposed to do anything. You don't do anything. Yeah? Now you also lose the underlying tendencies. Because even though previously you were doing things, it was still under the doing. There's the underlying tendency. And the underlying tendency is the asmimana anusayana. Asmimana means the conceit I am. There's an underlying tendency to think that you are. And this is why, even if you go into a deep state of samadhi, the idea I am underlies that deep state of samadhi. But when you come out of the samadhi, you say, that was me in that samadhi. So, but now you are also overcoming the underlying tendency I am. Asmimana anusaya is being overcome. And then even that state of samadhi you will take as me and I. And that is why there is all desire for future rebirth is gone. There's no craving that drives you on. There is no, your consciousness is no longer stationed anywhere, because the consciousness is completely uninterested in any kind of station whatsoever. There's no attachment to anything. Consciousness is not stationed. There's no craving to drive you forward. For that reason, it then stops there, because it no longer finds a footing. It is no longer established in Namarupa. It cannot move on anywhere else. Consciousness comes to an end. It's exactly the same thing you find at the other end of the path. That is a quick summary of how the first three factors of the path work. Yeah, as long as there's ignorance, as long as there's a feeling that you know where happiness is, misunderstanding all of these things, the sense of agency, taking the world to be more permanent than it actually is. This is one of the big illusions as well. We can understand a lot about the world simply by contemplating impermanence, how unreliable everything is. And then gradually, by contemplating that, your whole idea of where to search for happiness changes. Gradually, this whole thing unravels in this way. Okay, I hope that made a little bit of sense to you. And if not, then I have no more to say, except I'm going to try harder next time to make it more comprehensible. But it's quite hot today. I feel quite hot today. It's really hot. It's getting worse.
That's right.
Okay.
That's
What? Stop the retreat before. Okay, it gets harder to think when it gets warmer. That's what I find.
Yes.
In Perth, it's cold now. In Perth now, it's really nice. Yeah. Anyway, let's have a break. 10 minutes. So let's come back in at 7:20 or thereabouts. Yeah. Yeah, it's really awful. I can't see anything without my glasses. I can see a person. No, is that you? Okay. Okay. Very nice.
I did not see. It's time to try the thing.
Like this. So the hands. Okay. Okay, all right. I have it. What about some of the other ones that are for many people? This one. They want to hear you. Should we record it? It was satisfying.
Honestly, you. Well,
For everyone.
that's for everyone. Well, why I'm not here.
That must be you.
Oh, yes.
Because I don't be Arahant. Yeah, yeah. See that?
Well, we want your first.
Is there another question for her? I need this one. Dear Ajahn. Please, special one.
For you. I don't know if you will.
All right. Okay. All right then. Okay. It seems like I'm going to get this microphone. I can't get rid of this microphone. Okay. So. When are you ready with your let us know when you're ready, and I will pass over to you now. Okay. So, okay, let's leave those for everyone to one side for now, and we can have a look at one later on. Okay, so this is under Metta Sutta. Here we sing or chant the not busy with duties, the word chant unburdened with duties. Actually, the best one is actually neither of those. The best one is having few duties. That's the best one, because that's literally what it means. Paṭicca means having few duties. Do the monks and nuns in Perth don't mind working a lot, and here they are not less busy with duties, so they can spend more time meditating. And not busy with unburdened. Unburdened with duties actually is a bad one. I don't really believe it. Unburdened with duties. I always chant having few duties, which I think is the most is the best one. And that's literally what it means. Your opinion, please, with or without microphone. Okay, so one of the reasons people chant unburdened with duties is because they have lots of duties, and they kind of say, okay, well, at least I will be unburdened to those duties. But if you're going to follow the advice of the Metta Sutta, you have to actually reduce the number of duties. I should keep trying to remember that one actually myself sometimes. But yeah. So
He likes it.
he doesn't. You don't know anything. You don't know Ajahn Brahmali, so you don't know what you're talking about.
No, it seems like, you know.
Yeah, Ajahn Brahmali is one of these people who has great abilities in meditation. He can let go very easily. It's not so, and he doesn't actually create many duties. And you write an email to Ajahn Brahmali, the chance to get a response is virtually zero, very close to zero. So he doesn't actually do as much as it may seem, although he does travel a lot, but he doesn't always kind of, he doesn't actually increase the amount of work more than is necessary. So it's sometimes you kind of find yourself in a position that I guess it's difficult to take the duties below a certain level. So, but he tells me that his life is really about two things: meditation practice and then giving Dhamma talks. That's really what he enjoys. Anyway, so I hope that gives you a little bit of an answer to that one. You ready? Not yet. You ready? Okay. Okay, pass it over to you.
These two kind of go together. And actually, before I start, there's something I noticed earlier that I really want to share. But it's like all these people sitting on these sand benches makes me very, very happy because I made them myself out of the old floorboards with my footing. So I'm very glad they're being used.
Which one is that?
All of them, actually. All of the little sand benches and meditation benches, yeah. Well, usually in the monastery, you're just standing there, not many people will actually use them, so it makes me very happy that they're actually being used. Okay. Vimala, I consider already shared the story of becoming a bhikkhuni, which you tell a bit about yourself too. What do you think? She's laughing. What do you think about today's possibilities? Which training places would you recommend? I think the other one has something to do with that as well. Becoming a bhikkhuni, yeah. Let's start. Well, I meditated as a child, but then I sort of lost that going to school and nobody around me meditated. But I was always missing something and searching for something. And eventually, after university, I took off in a completely different direction, and I moved to a tiny little island with 300 people, and which happened to be the last sort of independent feudal stronghold in the West, or in the Northern Hemisphere, I think, something like that. And I lived there for a while, and that's where I encountered Buddhism. I heard about Buddhism before in school, but I went to the Jesuit school, and they was taught about Buddhism by a Benedictine monk. So I wasn't very inspired. So I didn't really think about Buddhism and meditation actually having anything to do with each other. But yeah, there I sort of started picking up meditation again, just by myself, just doing like maybe like listening to the sound of silence. I don't know why, but that's what I did. And at some point, I was always meditating in this cave. It was quite a long, deep cave, but it was a sea cave. So you had to make sure that you knew where the tides were doing, and not to get caught by the tides. You could only be in there maybe 2 hours before you would get wet feet. And at some point, there were, like on top of that cave, there was the headland of the island, and at some point, 2 Tibetan monks came to the island, and they started carving Omani Padme Hum on a rock that was exactly above my cave, exactly above the spot where I was sitting, actually, in that cave, as far as we could ascertain with that angle and then the depth say, I became a bit more interested in it, and then quite soon afterwards, I met a friend, and he told me about Vipassana. And immediately that same evening, I went on the internet and I signed up for a course, and that's how I ended up in Belgium in the Vipassana Center. And very soon thereafter, I moved to that center and I lived there. But yeah, still there was something missing there. And I think looking back, that was probably also the monastic form. There was something, yeah, one day I encountered a nun from Amaravati in one of their centers. And yeah, I immediately wanted to also ordain, and then I took off to Burma and became a CLA. And that's when I also found out that there's a slight difference between men and women in these things. Maybe I went with a friend who was a man, and he was almost immediately ordained, fully ordained as a bhikkhu after a few months. And I could not have an equal status, basically. I could only be CLA on 8 precepts. And maybe 10 precepts if I was happy later on, but that was just in my head. And then, yeah, on the way back from that monastery, because like I couldn't get a visa here, so I had to Israel and I had to come back. And on the way back, I picked up a book in Bangkok Airport, and that was Mindfulness Bliss and Beyond from Ajahn Brahmali. And then I also remember that I had a friend on this tiny little island who had once given me another talk from Ajahn Brahmali, and it was all about jhanas, and I didn't understand a word of it. So I had like put that down and thought, well, forget it. But then I started to get more interested in it, and I knew a bit more of the background. And so, yeah. I don't know, so so many things have happened, and I have to sort of summarize bits. So, so then, yeah, I did want to heard about Ajahn Brahmali, so it was about a year later, I think, ordaining bhikkhunis. I felt so inspired, I wanted to do that too. So it's, to make a long story short, about everything that happened in between, but that's how I ended up eventually in Australia and ordained. So that was bit of my story. And I think I have to take Ajahn advice here. Let me take my story fast. And that isn't a bit funny. With the advice of just writing it all down, putting it in a book, and then referring you to that. I think that's the best advice I've heard so far. Yeah. Because I have to keep on telling my story. Yes. So what do you think about today's possibilities? Well, for women, and I think you still have to be a pioneer. There's not many places that give training, and so yeah, it's not easy yet. You have to be pretty strong to get through that, and have friends, especially friends from the past, because otherwise it becomes really, really complex and really, really difficult. Yeah, I think other thing also talked about the same things that I would probably do these two in one go. So I'm curious about monastic system for bhikkhunis, or monastic development system for bhikkhunis. If I wish to be ordained as a bhikkhuni, where should I go? Where can I receive my monastic training? Where can I establish myself as a lay community of supporters? It still looks very misty at the moment. Okay. Well, yeah, I suppose it is, but I think the best advice I can give you is just to just go to various places, to various monasteries. In Europe, there's not that much space, but also in Australia, Dhammasara, Santi, and Newbury, I think as well. Also in the United States, and just go to places and get a good feel for what this is, and talk to the nuns and see how they've experienced it, and then you have a bit better understanding of the whole thing, and then you can make a decision based on what you feel is best for your own development, where you can grow in the Dhamma. The best advice I can give once by one is like, if you feel that your good qualities, your kusala dhammas are increasing, somewhere and your bad qualities are decreasing, then you have to stay there. If it's the other way around, you have to go. No matter how good the food is or how good all the requisites. Because some of these monasteries in the world, they're very rich. If you go to Amaravati, it's a very rich monastery and there's everything there. So, but even that, that's not an important issue because like lifting up your requisites, etc., is important, but it's not that you don't actually need that much. And it's much more important to see if you grow in the Dhamma or not. If you see that this is happening for you, then if you can grow in the Dhamma in whatever place you are, then that's where you need to go. And that can also change after a while. It's not that it's a decision for life to stay in that spot. If you, after a few years, and you really give it a good try, and maybe you end up somewhere else. Who knows? I don't know very many bhikkhunis that actually stay in the same place where they ordained for more than 2-3 years. But there are some as well. So. And where to establish, this is basically, I think, the best advice I can give for if you want to ordain as a bhikkhuni. And just you have to find out, follow your heart, find out for yourself what's the best place for you. You have to be accommodating. I think what I was trying to say is like how the whole system works. Yes, so it occurs to you. Well, it depends also a bit where you're going. In some places, there's you have the anagarika ordination first, that's a costume. And then afterwards, the samaneri ordination, so that's as a novice. It's 2 years for women, 1 year for men. And then you have the bhikkhuni ordination. And officially, according to Vinaya, you have to stay with your either preceptor or teacher for about 2 years. In practice, that doesn't quite happen very often. It depends where you are. In the United States, if you're not from the United States, that's very unlikely that you'll be able to do that because you won't get a visa. So you might be lucky, so you might not be. So there are other things like Tataloka, I heard is at the moment says you have to stay for 2 vasa. That means that in between you can go away and then you have to come back again, and that's okay. So it really depends on the bhikkhunis that are there and how they feel about things. Would you like to add a bit more, Aya? I can hand you the microphone.
Let me talk. Turn it down. You want to add something?
I'm very happy with this.
Then maybe I'll give this back to you.
You want to do the one?
Well, this one I'll probably give back to you anyway.
This one says, please open my microphone. So, okay, yesterday somebody asked about how to recognize an arahant. There are somewhere in the Bhagavatam 9 things an arahant can't do, like can't have sex, can't tell a lie, can't kill, etc. Please could you tell about it, I suppose? Sorry, I agree. This matter. Yes, an arahant can't do anything anymore that is immoral in whatever way, and also doesn't have any more conceit. All the hindrances are basically gone. I think because they have no more conceits, it also becomes very like there's nothing anymore that wants to show the self, show that I exist. Quite a bit difficult to answer this actually, but I always think about, when I think about the word arahant, I think about this example that Ajahn Brahmali says about Ajahn Tate and Ajahn Brahmali yesterday talked about. Just this little man in the corner that you hardly see, it just disappears. I find it an incredible, powerful image and very beautiful. And another example that I always find very powerful is that of an example of Ajahn Brahmali. At some point was sitting with a group of monks somewhere outside, meditating, and a king cobra came up to him. That's like a very poisonous, dangerous snake. And this king cobra lifted up his head to the level of the eye level of Ajahn Brahmali, opened his wound. And what Ajahn Brahmali did next was to stick out his hand and pat him. And says, "Oh, thank you for visiting me, aren't you? How kind of you." And this cobra just really loved being petted. And then he went away after a little while, but to the next monk did the same thing. And the monk was like, no, you got your idea, I'm not going to touch you, I'm not going to pet you. So I think this complete lack of fear, I think, is also a very powerful indication of an arahant, and this complete metta, this compassion for all living beings, without any concern of the personal safety here, but just this metta is just so strong that there's no fear at all. And so I find that also a very powerful indication. But that's also like the opposite of like all this these moral values, this complete perfect siddhas, is also the having all the opposite qualities, having the metta, having the compassion, having the generosity, etc., to a very high extent. Okay, I don't know, please read.
Okay, very good. Okay, very good. Okay. So we need to see what questions. You want to answer some more questions? Yeah, okay. Yeah, all right. Okay, so yeah, so this thing in the Angular lines is interesting in a number of ways. First of all, is like when Vimala was saying that you are pure in your morality, and the reason for that is because there is nothing that can make you do bad things anymore. There's nothing that can drive those immoral actions. This is kind of the whole point of being an arahant, is that you eliminate all the defilements of the mind. There's no motivation that can actually make you do bad things. It's impossible. Arahant is beyond those things. It has become part of you. You have become the epitome of the moral being. You are like, it's impossible for you to do bad things, basically. And that's kind of extraordinary when you think about it. It becomes part of who you are, part of your personality. You become conditioned so thoroughly to be moral that you cannot do anything bad anymore. But the other qualities there, and also interesting, is that the four of those nine is you cannot act from the four agatis. And agatis are four ways of being motivated by four negative things. As this kind of summarized the idea of being fully moral. You cannot act from desire, you cannot act from ill will, you cannot act from delusion, and you cannot act from fear. These are the four agatis. It's impossible. Hence the story of the snake. Yeah, you cannot act from fear. Welcome, snake. That's kind of cool, right? So you can, for that reason, you cannot act from fear because, for example, your own life, it doesn't, you don't really, if you die or you're alive, it doesn't matter to you. Actually, probably better off dead. Yeah, it's not right. Yeah.
oh, I'd like to kill you. Okay, maybe that's a good idea. So, now usually you don't say that because the other person keeps on come on, kill an arahant. So you cannot act on any of these four agatis, as they call it in the sutras. And the last one, which is interesting, is that you cannot live in a house like you formerly did and store up goods. Yeah, the idea of living in a home is that you store up things. You have clothes in your cabinet, you have kind of food in the cupboards, and you store things up so that you can enjoy yourself and all these kind of things. And arahant is incapable of doing that. They have destroyed, it says elsewhere, the fetter of householdership. We cannot really be a householder anymore. And this is interesting. It's often the discussion is it possible to be a lay person and arahant? Right? And the answer is basically it is impossible because that lifestyle is utterly unappealing to you. You cannot sustain that lifestyle of living in a house. And so the traditional saying is that if you become an arahant, either you ordain or you die. That's kind of the saying. So what does it mean that you die? This is one of those interesting things that the argument is very often because you're an arahant and there's no meaning for you anymore. You just die, yeah, because you either become a monastic or you die. Yeah? But I don't think that's the meaning. Yeah? I think the meaning actually is that when you become an arahant, one of the most prominent times of becoming an arahant, one of the most prominent times of becoming a stream entry, one of the most prominent times of any kind of insight or depth of meditation is on your deathbed. Yeah, that is why these things happen very easily because you have to let go anyway. So, and because you are on your deathbed anyway, of course you die afterwards. That's why you die so often after becoming an arahant. It's not because your life becomes meaningless, you just die as laborers. And I think that is my understanding of that. To me, that makes much more sense than the things you sometimes hear about these things.
Is there any case in
In this case of someone dying after becoming an arahant, there are instances of lay people becoming arahants. That's pretty interesting. Yeah. Yasa, the householder, ordained straight away. Yeah, so he didn't have a chance to die.
But was there any case that didn't ordain and die?
It's a good question. I think so. No, that's not. Is there any question of so? Anyone who died will become arahant on the deathbed?
Nobody knew that. He only died, didn't tell anybody.
You're not supposed to say I'm an arahant because it sounds bad. So I guess it's a good point. Is that some secret information that you have access to at the moment? Kind of behind the scenes. Okay, so I guess we can carry on. So we start with this one here. How is Buddhism related to politics? That's a very good question. Well, usually, one of the ways it is related to politics is that if you have a Buddhist community and you have Buddhist organizations, when politicians want input into political decisions, how to make up laws, those sort of things, it is actually good for Buddhists to kind of give input as well into those creation of laws for society, because Buddhism has a lot of good ideas about how to structure things, what kind of laws we should have for euthanasia, for example, these kind of things. Buddhism has a lot of good ideas. For that reason, I think it's good if we sometimes give our input, especially when politicians ask for it, if the government asks for it. This is one way to relate to politics. The other way to relate to politics is that when someone becomes an arahant, we try to get them elected for prime minister or president. Imagine having an arahant as a president. That would be really cool, wouldn't it? King Philip is an arahant. Or he might be, or maybe he can become, I don't know. But he doesn't have any power anyway, right? Okay, so Prime Minister of Belgium. But they weren't arahants, that was a problem. They were just useless. They were useless. They didn't go. The question is, how is Buddhism related to politics?
Yeah, but nothing related to
True, right. Okay, you're probably wrong. I have to retract that statement. So arahants and politics doesn't really go together.
But you're right, in some countries like Sri Lanka, you have monastics who enter parliament, for example. And it's usually a very bad idea because politics is much stronger in your form view than you want for politics. So before you know it, you have monks that get really dodgy and get corrupted and get into willing in the and all kind of stuff. And it's not the way that Buddhism should relate to politics. It is the way it happens in practice, but not the way it should happen. So a lot of the time, monastics stay out of politics. One of the things about ancient Indian society was that as a monastic, you were out of society. This was the whole idea of paṭicca. Paṭicca means to go forth. You exit society, you become an outcast, so almost. And if you break the law, you are actually beyond the law in ancient Indian society. There is the example story of the paṭicca-samuppāda, the second paṭicca for monastic. These are the most important rules for the monastics. And that's the paṭicca means you get expelled from the monastic community if you commit one of these offenses. And the second rule is about stealing. And there was this monk who went to the king and basically stole all the wood from the king's woodyard. That's kind of a no-no. And so the king got to know this. And he said, well, you're a monk, you can't do anything about it. Okay, carry on, or whatever. Something to that effect. So basically, you were outside of society. If you were an employee of the king, for example, you became a monk, there was nothing the king could do. You were a soldier in the army, the king couldn't take you back because you become a monk. So basically the idea is, especially as monastics, is to stay out of politics. Yes, you can give advice if someone asks for it, but you don't get involved in a way whereby you are you're bound to give advice, or you're bound to a certain political party or whatever. And I don't really, sometimes just even to have political opinions, I feel is not good for a monk, because the moment you have a political opinion, there are some people who are going to hate you. Yeah, because politics is so divisive. So if you kind of take a stand on politics, and the other half of people are going to say you're an evil monk because you have that view in politics, and not going to listen to you anymore. So we should ideally be above politics, and we should realize that there are good people everywhere, all walks of life, all kinds of views, and that is what matters. Those people with good hearts who want to practice a spiritual life, they are the ones you should teach, regardless of the political views. So it's nice for a monastic not to have political views. We may have some ideas about how the world can be run in a more moral and good way, but not political in a very overt political sense, always based on Buddhist ideas and Buddhist principles. In a lot of the world, there has been the idea of Buddhist countries, and sometimes Buddhist country means that the rulers are Buddhists. For example, in Sri Lanka, you had the present government is supposed to be a Buddhist government. That's how they become elected, because they sell themselves as Buddhists to the majority population is Buddhist. They sell themselves in that way. That doesn't make them good politicians. Just as bad as everyone else. In fact, pretty bad. The ones who have in Sri Lanka right now, very corrupt, very dodgy. So being Buddhist is not enough. You have to be a practicing Buddhist. There's a big difference between being Buddhist and being practicing Buddhist. The majority of Buddhists in the world are not practicing Buddhist. They're Buddhist in name only. BNO, Buddhist in name only. Bino. So there's a new, Right. Okay, so I hope that, I'm not sure if that answers your question. That's all I have to say right now. My Norwegian mind doesn't like it. If I listen to English too much, my Norwegian mind kind of starts to turn off at a certain point. And that's why I'm so dull in Australia, I think. That's how I'm coming together. Here, Ajahn, what produces all of this contentment of the mind? Thank you. Does that mean you have heaps of contentment? What produces all this contentment? Wow, I'm so contented. Where does it come from? How come I have all this contentment? I'm not sure if you are saying that you have so much contentment and now you want to know where it comes from, or whether you are trying to achieve it. Not entirely sure. But if you have it already, then investigate. Look at your own mind. Try to understand that this is the cause for being able to achieve that contentment in the future. Every time you have a good meditation, when I do guided meditation, I haven't been coming to the meditation here very much. I apologize for that. Sometimes I like to come out. And the reason is that Venerable Vimala and Venerable Butsu have very kindly said that they were very happy to run the meditation. So I thought, okay, in that case, I won't come out. Usually I come out to guided meditations. So the other problem is that I have so many things on my plate at the moment, and I feel a bit swamped in all of these things. So that's one of the reasons I haven't been coming out. But one of the things I always teach when I do a guided meditation is at the very end of the meditation to ask yourself if it was successful, if you became a bit more peaceful, you became a bit more happy, some of the bad qualities disappeared. Why did that happen? What was different about this meditation, that meditation, why it doesn't go so well then? And if you start investigating that, you will start to see some recurring patterns that have to do with your attitude when you start the meditation or you build up on the way, that have to do with what it means to let go. Suddenly one day you understand what it means to let go. Actually, it just means relaxing, that's all it means, yeah? That kind of let it go. Just relax, don't try so hard, don't have expectations, that kind of stuff, yeah? Suddenly it works. So investigate a little bit at the very end of every meditation to find out why you're having success. So if you do, if this means that you're getting content, well done. Yay, yay, I'm having some success. And well done. After saying well done, investigate. Yeah, and ask yourself, why am I feeling content? And you will see exactly some of those similar things. You have let go of something. Yeah? The desire is there. You have understood that those desires were silly. Yeah? You have turned your mind to some kind of way of seeing contentment as something positive. And for that reason, the mind is leaning towards contentment. And then, of course, that's what you experience. So investigate these things. If you are not content and you're asking how to become content because you're not content, well, the thing that stops contentment is, of course, desire. And desire is what drives kind of the restless mind all the time. So what you then have to do is you have to kind of just recognize that those desires are silly. I've been talking a lot about this already on this retreat. Most of the things, the desires I have are about the future and the past. Remember, you have no future. Is that a nice thought? I have no future. Yay! If you have no future, all that's left is the present moment. Yeah, I'm just right here. I have no future. Wow, what a wonderful thing. I don't have to think about it, worry about it, sort it out, solve any problems. I can just relax, for goodness sake, finally. I have no future. And if you know that you might die on the next breath, if you know that you may not even go to bed tonight, then what's the point of thinking about going to bed and having a rest afterwards? You just enjoy the present, stay here. This is the idea of the death contemplation. We don't know when death is going to come. Because we don't know it, now is the right time to be ready to die. Yeah? And when you're ready to die, there's nothing to look forward to. There is no future. It's actually very nice not to have a future. Because not having a future means samadhi, it means present moment awareness, it means jhana. That's what it really means, where you have absolutely no future. It means incredible amounts of bliss, incredible amounts of happiness, incredible amounts of peace. It's the best thing that can happen to you. So don't have a future, that's the first thing. There's nothing there anyway. Yeah. The world just goes on, more of the same problems, there's nothing of interest there. Past, same thing, let it go. There's nothing interesting in the past. The past is finished. If you're having problems with the past, learn to forgive them, because very often there's problems with people. Learn to forgive the past. People don't know what they're doing anyway. You didn't know what you were doing. Okay, I can forgive it. I can forgive robots. I can forgive myself. Same thing. So if you are attached to things of the past, that, oh, in the past everything was so wonderful, remember, now you're practicing Buddhism and you're on the right path. This is how you become happy. Past, that was just another delusion, probably. Let it all go, man. So just use some of these ideas that we're talking about on this retreat. They're really powerful ideas. Don't worry so much about dependent origination. The talk I gave just before now was just too, I felt kind of uncomfortable about it as I was talking. It was kind of, this just feels too theoretical to me as I was going along. And I wasn't really able to express it properly anyway, I felt. So kind of, sometimes you give a talk and I feel kind of, well, maybe I should just shut up and walk out of it. That's what I do sometimes. That's probably a good feeling, right? It probably means that you probably should do it more often. Other times it's more, sometimes the simple talks are the best ones. They are the inspiring ones that make you actually do the work. Yeah, I don't know. As one of those things, I listen to Ajahn Brahmali. Ajahn Brahmali is a talk every Wednesday. I'm putting on a monastery, and I've heard his story. I know his things inside out. I know exactly what he's going to say as soon as he says the first word. I know the rest 10 minutes. Yeah, okay. No, it's not. I'm exaggerating. It's not as bad as that, because in the monastery, Ajahn Brahmali's talks are quite different from what they are to lay people. Yeah, he has the ability to speak to the audience, which is kind of very important. When I listen to Ajahn Brahmali, there is this kind of power about him. Yeah? There is this feeling of peace that comes with listening to someone who's very peaceful. And you may have noticed that yourself sometimes when you listen to talks by someone who is very powerful in a certain way. Ajahn Brahmali can just sit there and become peaceful just by listening to him, because you can feel where the talk is coming from. It's coming from a place of peace, coming from a place of kindness, coming from a place of caring for his audience. It's very tangible when you listen to that. Yeah, and so that is the way Dhamma talk should be. It's more about where you're coming from and the content of what you say. The more complicated the Dhamma talk is, the greater the proof that you have no insight at all. It said something bad about me, right? It's really complicated Dhamma talks. Oh dear, I gotta kind of find another way. Yeah. But on the other hand, I must admit, it's also nice sometimes to talk about the deeper issues of the Dhamma and try to understand these things. I must admit, I do enjoy it a little bit. Maybe that is a sign of my lack of wisdom. I'm not sure, but I do, regardless, enjoy it a little bit. But sometimes it comes out better than other times. Anyway, we're getting sidetracked again, as usual. So I hope that answers the question. If not, please try again tomorrow. Okay, is Mara a sentient being who appears at will in all realms of existence? Is he defined as having 5 khandhas, or can he be seen as a metaphorical figure and for inner evil or bad aspects in a person? It's a bit of both. The reason why Mara is a sentient being is because Mara was actually a god before Buddhism as well. So it's kind of one of these beings taken over from the pre-existing Indian culture of the time. And many of these gods also found in the Buddhist literature, because this is a one society, one culture, and kind of with all of these god figures that kind of merge with each other. And you've got to give these gods a name anyway, but we'll give them the existing names rather than finding your new names for these gods. Is that right? If you have all these gods, does every culture have to give them new names, or can we kind of just keep the names of the old cultures? It's easier to keep the existing names, I guess, instead of kind of, otherwise you have to, it's difficult enough if you have a child to decide the name of the child. It's difficult enough if you get all these gods, it makes it much more difficult. So, yeah. I don't think, the fallen God is independent. Mara is just a being, and sometimes it falls, sometimes it does not. I don't think there is any. Where does the story come from? Mara is a fallen God. I don't know. It's not in the suttas. I don't know where it is. I'm not sure if it really is such. I think that might be more popular Buddhism. I don't actually know where that story is in fact, to be honest with you. But Mara in the suttas is, sometimes Mara does dodgy things. It looks a bit like a fallen god, I suppose. Where in the Vimala Sutta, chapter 50, where he enters the belly of Mahamoggallana. No story. Yeah, that's kind of that was very bad. Or in the same sutta where he enters the householders on Vimala, so it gets the householders to abuse the monks of the Buddha. And then he goes reborn in the hell realm afterwards. Maybe it's the days, I don't know. Maybe it's kind of Mara in the hell realm, and it goes back to Mara afterwards, I don't know. Yeah. So they're probably, maybe kind of attached to the title of Mara, it still claims to be Mara in the hell realm. I don't know. I'm not sure what happens there. Anyway. So Mara is, in that sense, a sentient being. It may be that Mara has a kind of particular position. They say that Mara belongs to the realm called the paṭicca-samuppāda realm, the realm where you control the creativity of other beings. Yeah, so it's kind of the highest sensory realm. That's where Mara is said to hang out. But in Buddhism, Mara is much more psychological. In Buddhism, most of the time, I did a count of this once, when Nikaya was counting how often Mara was used to mean a real sentient being, and how often it was used metaphorically. Metaphorical usage far outweighs the idea of a sentient being. That is really what it means in the suttas. For example, when you have the nun Vajira sitting in meditation, someone mentioned that to me today, and she sits in meditation, Mara comes, yeah, you don't know what you're doing, what does a woman know, what kind of stuff, and she dismisses him, yeah, and that, of course, is a psychological thing that happens. Anyway, that's what I think is. I think it's obvious psychology, self-doubt and this kind of thing. So that would be natural, in a society where, which is kind of very patriarchal society, like ancient society, women probably would have less confidence. They probably would maybe think, oh, what do I know? Kind of a natural psychological tendency in that sort of society. So I think, to me, that's obviously metaphorical. And that's how it is used very, very commonly in the suttas. The tempter is the Mara, really. Okay, next one. If Ajahn Brahmali went to the Great Wall of China, do you think he would appreciate the work and the efforts put into it, as he did when he visited the pyramid in Sri Lanka, pyramid in Arulupura?
In the South
Uh-huh.
America.
Okay. This is your question. But I don't think so, because the Great Wall of China is high enough. You have to get over the forest, So only when you go over the canopy. Pyramid of China, there is no canopy in the first place. It's barren. You see the pictures. I think it's a bit different. You have been there? Yeah. Was it good?
Well, what we call one of the world wonders.
What did the teacher?
Well, took a lot of work to build all that. About 300 or 400 miles. You can walk like from America, from the south to the north, take like the whole year.
Okay. And what is insight? I think the Great Wall.
More effort.
Effort. Okay. So if you want to build a good mind, you have to put effort.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Well, that's part of life. You have to protect what you have.
And I just wanted to see if you say anything more, but you are Great Wall of China and the pyramids in South America. Yeah. I think it's always nice when you can come away and go somewhere and come away with some Dhamma insight. It's always nice. So if you come away with effort, that's kind of nice. Right? You come away with samadhi, metaphor. It's always nice. If that's the case, then I think it's worthwhile to travel. You come back with a wiser mind, maybe not. As Abraham says, he says that you want to travel to the Great Wall of China. You know that saying, of course.
Yeah.
Don't want to go to China. Go to the main gate and put it down on the street. Look at the wall. All walls are the same.
It's not the same.
Great Wall of China, the Great Wall of Bodhinyana, the Great Wall of Tidoria. Little wall. That's good enough. That's all the same. It's the small walls directly is as good as the Great Wall of China. That's what we would say. All right, let's go on. In Ajahn, I want to go back to the subject of taking away life. What when we are dealing with organisms which directly harm us, like ticks and mosquitoes? How is it interesting, right? Or when we are attacked by other humans, what can we do in our self-defense? So what happens if you are attacked by another human? Yeah, say that someone wants to steal your belongings, and they do something bad towards you, whatever it is. Can you do something in self-defense? And the answer is that if you do something in self-defense, it is far less bad karma than if you are the instigator of violence. If you are the one who instigates, it's going to be really bad. It's very strong intention there. If you do something in self-defense, it's like protecting yourself. It is not nearly as bad. It's nowhere near as bad as instigating yourself. It's a very different kind of intention, yeah? Self-defense versus that. Still, if someone attacks you and you punch them in the face or whatever, it's still, you're probably coming from anger, it's still not the ideal thing to do, yeah? If someone wants to steal your wallet, okay, here's my wallet, take it. Yeah? I don't really want to get into the fight. If you want to punch me, and be over with it and kind of go on your way afterwards. You know the famous story, it's a very good story to give an example of how high the Buddha sets the bar for being kind. This is a very famous story of the simile of the saw, which many of you probably know already. Yeah? The simile of the saw is what the Buddha said, even if bandits and scallywags pin you to the ground, take out the saw and saw you apart, limb by limb. First the saw off your arm, then the second arm, one leg, another leg. Yeah. And by that time you're probably dead already, not so much blood. Yeah. Even if that happens, you should have metta, loving kindness and compassion towards those people. It's a very powerful simile, and it shows you that the idea in Buddhism is even if someone attacks you like this, actually you should have metta and compassion. And I think the chances are, if you have a lot of metta and compassion when someone attacks you, the chances that they will carry it out is actually very small, because unless they're out of their mind, they will feel that. Yeah, they will know that something special is going on, and say, "Whoa, okay, I better not touch this person," because you have a vibe about you which is very different from normal people. And so it's actually a very powerful way of stopping others. Of course, not everyone feels those things. A person who is crazy or out of the head of drugs or whatever may not feel anything. But many people will. That is the highest kind of of action, basically, if someone attacks you. That's what we should all be kind of aiming for. And it is possible. That is kind of the weird thing. Yeah? It is possible because when someone attacks you in this way and they saw you apart, limb from them, well, you are going to be painful for a short while, and then you're going to die. And if you're able to have a mind of loving kindness and compassion, even at such a time, you're going to go straight to a very high heavenly realm. You should probably thank these people for sawing your apart because they sent you straight to heaven. Yeah, so thank you for helping me to get to heaven more quickly. That's probably what you should be. So that's why you're so happy when they saw your apart, limb by limb. Yeah, whereas the people who do that, if you are a good person and they saw your part, they are the ones who are in serious trouble. Yeah. Doesn't that come by that? Okay, but then you are in serious trouble, right? Because if you really do something bad towards someone who has a good heart, especially someone who has loving kindness to you while you do that, very, very bad action. And that is why you have the ability to be compassionate towards a person like that, because you understand who actually is in trouble in this particular case. So this is the ideal, but in the meantime, if you do act with violence and self-defense, it's not to be too concerned about. It's not a big deal. Yeah, it's not the kind of action that is terribly bad or anything. Yeah? Killing mosquitoes and ticks. Again, usually we have lots of ticks in Australia as well. Yeah? And the ticks in Australia are less dangerous because they don't have any viruses. You don't usually get any bad consequences from them. So what you do when the tick comes, you just pull it out and put it back in the forest. And it goes after a kangaroo instead. The poor kangaroos, they kind of ticks everywhere. And that's what we do, is we don't actually kill ticks in them. I never have to kill ticks. Mosquitoes, I never kill mosquitoes. If I get the mosquito in the room, I say, please have dinner or lunch, whatever you like. It's okay. I can deal with one of those little bites. Usually I'm quite able to keep mosquitoes out of my room. It's not usually a problem. So again, you try to remember that these are beings that want to live, they want to exist. They don't want to die, but just like you. You know, and they don't really understand what they're doing. They don't understand that they're coming to a human being and irritating the human. They think they're just being innocent and having a meal, and just kind of going on. That's what they think, and they just want to live. So think about them a little bit like little beings who actually have feelings, because they do have feelings. That's the whole point. And when you see them as little beings that have feelings, if you think of them, I don't know, sometimes they can even do, this could be like a family member has been reborn as a mosquito. It's possible, right? That is a way of anthropomorphizing them, making them into humans, by thinking of them as we all go round this cycle of existence anyway. And the Buddha says it's difficult to find any person in this world who has not been your mother, your father, your son, your daughter, your brother, your sister. And when you look at people this way, and even mosquitoes perhaps in this way, it changes things quite a lot. You look at them in a different view. So it is good to avoid these things. It is really good, and especially if you can have compassion at the same time. Not just do it because it is a precept, do it out of compassion. Because when you do things out of a very powerful motivation, that is when you make really good karma. That is the ideal way. Not just forcing yourself not to do it because you're keeping the 5 precepts or whatever.
Oh, I saw it's like a way.
I'm glad you have now you really have experienced something really exciting. Right. Okay. You were kind to the slug? Were you kind to the slug?
Oh, somebody narrated conference.
Yeah. Okay.
And she didn't show me. And if not what you explained,
It was never
it's kind of square.
Square?
Yeah. One is it's not long, like you said.
You were afraid,
Maybe they could.
Okay. All
But
right.
it looks like a square.
Square slug, as it was. Very interesting. Okay. So maybe we're both right. Yeah? It's both square and long, depending on whether it's square. That's good. Maybe both are right. We don't have to argue about this. That's very happy. So okay, good. I'm glad you got to see the slug. That's really. Now your life is your life enriched?
It's my first time. So
Your first time. Okay. It always has to. Okay. Good. Anyway, let's carry on because I think let's see what happens here. Does the term ill will encompass all types of negative detrimental feelings like anger, aggressivity, harshness, cruelty, selfishness, fear, sadness, impulsivity, stinginess, boredom, and frustration? Or do some of these feelings better fit into restlessness and worry? I think you're taking ill will a little bit too far here. A lot of things, ill will is like anger, right? So anything which is kind of within the realm of anger is what really ill will is meant. So yes, irritation is sort of that. Irritation is a bit of anger, right? Low-level anger. Aggressivity, usually if you're aggressive, usually that comes from some kind of anger or irritation as well. So I would say yes, probably. Harshness sometimes comes from ill will, maybe not always. Sometimes it can just come from cruelty. It can come from not caring, right? That doesn't matter. I got to do this, or get out of the way, kind of harshness. Still bad, but it's not ill will necessarily. Cruelty is not ill will. Cruelty is like enjoying the pain of others, or enjoying the pain of whatever beings. Yeah? It's different from ill will. Selfishness is not ill will. Selfishness is greed, desire. Fear, is that ill will? Not really. Fear is like you're afraid about the future. You're afraid your house is going to burn down. Yeah, so that's not ill will, is it? It's more related to desire in that case. It may be related to other defilements, but not necessarily ill will. sadness. Is sadness related to ill will? Not usually. Usually sadness will be related to desire again. Your attachments get kind of disappointed and feel sad as a consequence. Impulsivity, not really. Stinginess, not really. Boredom, not really. Frustration, not really. These are all different things. Yeah. So it's about anger, really. And many of these other feelings fit into desire. Desire is one of the root problems of all of these feelings, including anger. If there's one root defilement, it is desire. Desire makes you restless. Desire makes you tired, and after enjoying so much, you go to sleep usually. It makes you slothful. Desire makes you angry. If when your desire doesn't get fulfilled, you get upset about things. Desire makes you doubtful because you don't understand the clarity where the path is supposed to go, that you have to give up the desire. So desire is really the root defilements of these defilements. I think that's a very kind of important understanding sometimes. Sometimes people ask, how do I overcome tiredness? How do I overcome restlessness? And the answer is usually try to overcome more desire and ill will. That's usually the root of the problem. All right. I'll continue for a few more minutes and then I will stop. Dear Ajahn Brahmali, how do we define the world? Listening, it seems like only something external separated from us. Yet aren't we all the world? Is the idea of separation, us versus the world, not exactly the problem? Are there not 7 billion worlds? And perhaps that's the problem too. Indeed, how do we make the abstract more tangible? Okay, these are all very good questions. And when I use the word world, the way the word world is defined in the suttas is the world of the 5 senses. Yeah, so that is seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, and touching. This is the world. And that world is almost the whole world that we are immersed in at almost all times. There is another world according to the sutta. That world is the world of deep meditation. Yeah, it's called the Rupa Loka. That is a different kind of world, but that world is very profound. We don't have to worry so much about that world because those attachments are very, very weak compared to the ordinary world. So what is this world of the 5 senses? And when I say it is external, actually, it isn't really external. It is actually internal. It is always internal. Because when I see something, when each one of us sees something, where does that seeing happen? It actually happens in your mind. Yeah? Is there anything out there? Well, I guess there is something out there because all of you are there. There is something out there, but really the way that we experience the world is mentally, is inside of us. This is where we hear things. The sound is not actually in the air. The sound is in our head, in our minds. Yeah? That's what the sound is. The smell and taste and everything else is within the mind. What the world actually is, we don't know. The world is just, maybe it's absolutely nothing at all. There is some very interesting philosophers these days who are starting to reappraise the way we have been taught about the world traditionally. It's very interesting ideas coming out of these philosophers and scientists. And I think it's fair to say that the traditional view of the world as material and the mind emerging from that material world is completely wrong. Got things on its head. The mind is primary. Why is the mind primary? Because we can only experience anything through the mind. Yeah. So obviously the mind comes first. The material world, the laws of the universe, they are an abstraction. They are a secondary thing that comes from our experience. So if you say that the world, material world comes first, it's the exact reverse of what actually is going on. The material world is a derivation from our experience. So you are very right. The world is our inner world. That's the real world. And the Buddha says as much, which is very fascinating. There is the Paṭicca Sutta. Numerical discourses, 4th chapter, number 46, 45, something like that, 40 somewhere, where the Buddha, where this fellow monk, this fellow called Paṭicca, yeah, Ajahn Brahmali calls him the first astronaut. And he was an astronaut because he wanted to go to the end of the world. Yeah? And he didn't have a spaceship because this was before the time of spaceships. But he had a stride. One step was like going from one ocean to the other ocean. So because he had this supernormal stride, he said, I'm going to walk to the end of the world. Yeah, that's not, and so he decided to walk to the end of the world. And he couldn't get to the end of the world. Surprise, surprise. And so he went to the Buddha and he says, Venerable Sir, I didn't find the end of the world. And the Buddha said, no wonder you didn't find it. You looked for it in the wrong place. Where do you find the world? Where do you find the end of the world? Where do you find the origin of the world? In this fathom-long body with its consciousness. That's where you find the world. That's kind of really interesting because this, I think this shows us that the Buddha was leaning on the side of what now we will call idealist philosophy, and the world really exists in the mind, that material things are completely secondary if they exist at all. Maybe everything is just mental then. I don't know what the answer is to that question. It's a philosophical question. It doesn't really matter for Buddhists whether everything is mental or not. But there's something there that the Buddha is far more. It's the mind that matters. The mind is primary. The world that is important is my world, your world, everyone's world, not some kind of abstract world out there which exists apart from our experience. Our experience is the world. That is the world that matters, because that is the world where there is dukkha. Dukkha only exists in your experience. It doesn't exist anywhere else. It is in your experience that it is not self. It is in your experience that things are impermanent and unreliable. Yeah? So exactly, that is the world that matters. So in a sense, there are, as you say, 7 billion little worlds. Yeah? My world, your world, all of these things. So that is how you kind of make the world more tangible, like knowing that actually it is your inner life. That is all that matters. Yeah. All right, let's stop there. Okay. Good.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Okay, very good. Okay, so I'll leave this for you.
Brahmanism.
Brahmanism.
Yeah.
Some of it. Some Buddhist.
Ajahn
Brahmanism. Not Brahmanism. Brahmanism. I see. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, that is true. Okay. Oh, let's do that. All right. Arahant Samma Sambuddho Bhagavata Buddhaṃ Bhagavatāṃ Abhivādemi Svākāto Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammaṃ Supatipanno Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho Sangham Namami